Welcome to 7 Investing Now, a show that teaches you how to take a long-term view on investing by better understanding what's happening in the market now.
Good afternoon, 7 investors, and welcome to the Monday edition of 7 Investing Now. My name, of course, is Daniel Brooks Klein, and if I look a little more glum than I usually do, Red Sox swept by the Yankees this weekend. Saints beat the Patriots. That cost me a mug to Simon. Tottenham got blown out by Arsenal, and the Rangers lost in preseason hockey. This was an ugly sports weekend. Steve Symington, did you spend it outside or did you spend it watching sports as I did, quite unsuccessfully?
I was stomping grapes in sunshine at my family's my sister-in-law's winery down in Billings. So fantastic way to spend the weekend.
I'm glad you said winery because stomping grapes. I was like, did you go beat someone up? Like, what does that mean? No, Steve's family owns a winery, or your in-laws own a winery, which they then sold to your sister-in-law. Am I getting that correctly?
Yep. Yeah.
We are going to talk the mess that is the movie business. Then we are going to talk Amazon doing something really bold. Amazon is usually known for cutting prices. In this case, Amazon is raising prices, and I'm going to argue that they may be starting a new trend. And lastly, we're going to talk about a subject I'm sure you all talk about all the time around the dinner table, probably with your friends. Probably it's big in the movies you watch. That, of course, would be treasury yields. No, I had to look up what treasury yields were earlier. This story to me is silly. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But first, Steve, I want to talk about the movie business because you and I, pre-pandemic, we're both pretty big movie fans. A lot of times I'd hear you were taking the kids to the movies. I specifically lived so I could walk to the movies in our previous place that we lived. So pre-pandemic, I really liked the movies. And I'm going to say my behavior was changed, but we're going to get into that later. So Shang-Chi, which is the latest Avengers movie, so Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's topped the box office for the 4th straight weekend. And it's done about $196 million in US and Canada. That makes it the top grossing film for the year. It made another $166 million globally, so it's going to be at about $360 million at the end of this weekend, or when they finish tabulating last weekend. So, Steve, arguably this film might get to 450. That would place it below pretty much every Marvel movie ever. Does that tell you everything you need to know, that even the blockbusteriest of blockbuster just isn't going to matter anymore? Or am I reading this a little too seriously?
Yeah, I don't know. You might be. It's one of those things where this is sort of this is a group of heroes, right, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that arguably almost nobody had heard of, before they launched this, unless you're like a big Marvel nerd and you're reading the comics and you understand this. So, I mean, I wouldn't read too far into its performance, and I think they're calling it a success just because this is sort of one of those like third tier characters that they don't really, didn't have any huge expectations for, but they're obviously setting up a bigger stage. So,
yes, it did. Pre-pandemic, when this film was set up, it was supposed to be $1 billion movie. That was the benchmark for the mark. Because look, you're looking at the person who wrote a clinical analysis of why Guardians of the Galaxy would only do like 400 million that I got lambasted for. There's something like 4,000 tweets telling me what an idiot I am. It's been written up in multiple theme park publications about how badly I got this wrong. So yeah, they're framing this as a hit. But Steve, do you think that's largely because people don't understand the economics of the movie business? And let me break it down quickly. Yeah. They don't tell you what the budget is, but the budget for this is probably somewhere north of $250 million. Typical marketing is probably about the same, but I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that they probably spent half that. So maybe 375 is your all-in cost. Yeah. If you get to 500 million, let's say half that. It's a little less than that, but let's say half that goes to the theaters. So you're at 250. Let's be generous and round it up to 300 million. Steve, in your theatrical release, you've lost money. So I understand there's a longer reaching tail for this, but under what circumstances is a major blockbuster movie losing money, at least in the prime of its release, considered a hit?
I don't know. I think it's also strange times, right, in the box office. So I think they can call this a hit given the circumstances and considering the fact that they can use this as, if anything else, a retention tool for Disney Plus. moving forward. And to be fair, I was actually on record about 7 years ago calling Guardians of the Galaxy, saying it would probably be at least 800 million globally at the box office. So that was one of my calls where I was like, yes, thank you. But yeah, I didn't have high hopes for this one anyway, given its both its schedule and the subject matter. I'll go see it, and I think Marvel fans will go see it. But I think a lot more people are going to wait for it to reach Disney Plus too. So it'll be interesting, to see how it kind of plays out and how well, whether it has legs at the box office in the coming weekends. That'll be something to watch for sure.
Here's the thing. It's already down to topping the box office at $12 million. What do legs mean? It does 8 million next week. Like, yeah. I'm being very generous when I say 500 million globally. That assumes a China release, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And again, we would love your questions. We'd love your comments. I'd love to hear if you're willing to go to the movies. And here's what I'll say, Steve. My bar to go to the movies, and this is my biggest case, forget the meminess of AMC or any other theater company. My biggest case against these companies is I was a prime moviegoer. As I said, I literally moved someplace where walking to a movie theater would be possible. And I did that all the time. I'd go to movies at like 3 p.m. because I'd finished working. I'd go see something or see it again. Now, I was going to go see Shang-Chi, and because our past couple of weekends, my son has been working and we haven't been able to do it, I Googled the other day, hey, when's it coming out? And I went, wait a minute, it's on Disney Plus in like a month, or maybe even less than that, and I'm not going to do it. My bar has gone up. So let me ask you the question. Again, we would love you to weigh in. Let me ask you the question. What does it take to get people out of the house if a movie advertised as starring the next Avenger, that is tying it into the biggest box office series of all time, really is not a needle mover? I mean, this would be considered a mild hit under most circumstances, because a lot of mild hits actually lose money in their first run. But what's going to get people to the theater? What's going to get you to the theater?
I would say, I wouldn't say necessarily to the theater, but to the, out of the house period. I'd say things like sporting events and concerts. These are things that we really miss, things that offer a truly differentiated experience relative to their alternative streaming versions. It's not the same, arguably, watching a concert, streaming or a sporting event. Yeah, you can watch, football on TV, but college football, those sorts of things that are nearby. You might argue that for all but the very biggest movies, most people are willing to just wait until they can stream it on their, 80-inch TVs at home. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I would actually argue that for not college football and not pro football in like heavy tailgate markets, but in a lot of markets, like, I don't know, if I still lived in New York, would I want to get out to the Meadowlands, or would I want to watch it like in a bar or in an apartment? I think there's a really big barrier there. Now, let's look at this from an investing point of view. I don't think this hurts Disney. You can't invest in the NFL, but I don't think this hurts the NFL, because they'll make their money one way or another. And the reality is most teams are going to sell out whether people actually physically go to the games, because you're not going to give up those tickets. Yeah. But Steve, is this a case of where sort of all the lesser players, like if you're Disney, you are 1, 2, 3 in terms of IP on the top 5 list. Right below you, Comcast is next, and they are a distant second. This is not Coke and Pepsi. This is Coke and like RC Cola. There's a few franchises, obviously, Jurassic Park and Fast and the Furious. There's a couple that Comcast owns. But if you're Comcast and your streaming platform is Peacock and not Disney Plus, are you in real trouble? Like, do you have to like literally adjust how you're making movies?
Yeah, I think you do. It's really a tough go for any company not named Disney, in my opinion, going forward. And it'll be really interesting to see how this unfolds. Kind of once life sort of returns to totally normal. You might argue that it's kind of normalized already to some extent, but I think what happens is we see some of these kind of second and third tier movie producers take some, a few big expensive shots at the big screen once the pandemic is basically really in the rearview mirror. And, to that end, you've got Pfizer's CEO over the weekend saying that life is going to return to normal within a year. And he basically echoed the sentiment of Moderna's CEO, which was previously expressed. And he also said we might need COVID boosters annually. But I think maybe once it returns to normal, we do this. But I'm not sure that those big, expensive shots at the big screen will pay off. But I think they'll still take them.
I think the Disneys of the world are going to take them. I think the big franchises are going to take them. I think we're going to see a massive contraction in the number of screens. And I agree with you. I can't wait to get to a concert. I don't live in a great place for the bands I would like to see, so I'm very eager to travel to concerts. And I've been to the movie theater. My son wanted to watch a wrestling pay-per-view, and we couldn't go in person in Chicago to see it, so we watched it in a movie theater, and it was a cool experience. It was 5 hours, so we got to eat. There were drinks. There weren't a lot of people there. So I do think there's uses for theaters, but Steve, do you think aside from the known franchises that we're just going to see movie budgets go down? Because like Netflix has figured out, hey, I can make an Adam Sandler movie where I'm paying Adam Sandler $20 million and I'm giving him another $20 million to make the movie. Like half of that goes to like his buddies. And then they make some piece of crap and people watch it. Sorry to insult you, Adam Sandler fans. I know he's a really nice guy. He filmed a couple of those movies in Swampscott, Massachusetts, and I've heard, which is where I grew up, and I heard nothing but great things about him. But these are not great movies. Is that just kind of the model where we're seeing a lot of like Kissing Booth and like I don't even know the titles are like Bright, the one where Will Smith battled orcs or was an orc, or I don't even remember, or the one where Sandra Bullock wears a blindfold. Like these are all kind of like pretty low rent movies if they were released in theaters that were all considered kind of hits in the streaming world. Is that the new normal?
Maybe. I think, like I said, I think we've got, kind of an argument for some pretty expensive, like big box office hits. And they've spent a fair bit of money on some of their series. They've talked about how much money they wanted to spend on like a Game of Thrones prequel, but I don't even know if that one's still on. But I think maybe they're smarter about the way that they allocate those budgets. I think those budgets will still be there. They'll just be used differently. You might see more, like a docu-series kind of thing, not a docu-series, but longer series where you have basically multiple short movies that make up a season of a new kind of epic adventure or something like that. So I think we see more of that.
So I agree with that. More like HBO style programming where you're spending significantly. And that hasn't particularly worked for Apple. We talked a little bit on our Slack over the weekend about how Apple has spent all this money and they have shows people are talking about, but nobody's actually watching those shows. And I know Ted Lasso fans would argue with me, but you only have 20 million US subscribers. So these are, it's like Parks and Recreation or 30 Rock. These are shows that amongst your sort of semi-intellectual friends feel like hits, but amongst the broader world, they're not actually doing that good numbers. But I think Amazon's Lord of the Rings sequel or all the things HBO can do with the Game of Thrones world or George R.R. Martin's Wild Cards is out there being licensed. Like, I think you're going to see some of those big tickets. I'm watching Titans, which is a live action version of the Teen Titans that is incredibly well done. That was originally done for the DC Comics service, which like 6 people got. And now it's being repurposed. It's on HBO and it's airing on TNT. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that where the theater becomes less important. And for Disney, I think the numbers are pretty easy. Now, they're not easy if you're Scarlett Johansson, but like something like Black Widow, maybe that tops out at $500 million or 400 or whatever the number is. But maybe 5 million people directly signed up for Disney Plus after the paid window to watch it. But maybe another 10 million looked at like the bunch of movies you'll get on Disney Plus. So as an artist and someone who's suing them, how do you figure that out? It's really, really difficult. Steve, let's wrap this up a little bit here. But let me close it out. Are you going to see even things like Marvel, where the TV shows become more important? Where like I loved all those shows, but they were all sort of just like sort of connective tissue and not so much like moving like big narrative things. Is it possible that like the big happenings in a Star Wars or a Marvel are actually going to happen on the small screen?
I think the model works and it has worked. And people have talked for a long time about how they're afraid people are going to have like superhero fatigue, right? But they've been talking about
Not me.
yeah, exactly. I mean, for the past 20 years, you could say the same thing. Like, oh, people are going to get tired of superheroes eventually. It's like they'll still be saying that in 100 years, I think, and they'll still have enough material to keep going. But I think there's plenty of material where your small screen stuff plays a larger role, and they realize that that's kind of how you keep people, and you kind of become more sticky. You give them well-made productions like that for the small screen.
So to wrap this up, Steve, here's what I would say. When you're looking at this from an investing point of view, I would arguably look at the winners. Like Disney has a much better chance of being a long-term success in streaming than Comcast does. And, HBO and Time Warner and that whole mashup with Discovery, that could be interesting, but I'd be really careful about placing my bet, and sorry to our friend Alan Sokoloff, on say like Viacom. And I understand that there's a lot of like advertising metrics and Pluto and other things that sort of work there. But your content isn't good when the SpongeBob movie or the fifth ranked Star Trek series that really kind of nobody cares about compared to The Mandalorian. I worry about that. This is going to be a world where franchises matter. We're even seeing it play out now on television, where AMC was a powerhouse for a long time. And now you're starting to see their shows get old. And we saw this with HBO. When you can't replace your hits with hits, it becomes very, very difficult. Now, HBO is going to get a lot more leeway than a cable network. Steve, I'll give you the last word here, and then we'll take a couple of questions.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a hurry up and wait scenario just to see how it unfolds. And however it unfolds, I think it'll be good for consumers. And I think that's maybe one of the things that a lot of people can take solace in, unless you're maybe an investor in these third tier services. But I think you're right. You focus on the companies that kind of win in this space as an investor, like Disney's. And,
no, we're in a golden age of content, and that's going to lead to a question here from Max Lucas, because he brings up something. I definitely want to watch the Foundation show based on Isaac Asimov novels, but I'm tired of getting more streaming services, and probably will keep me from watching it. I believe that one, Steve, is that one on Amazon or is that one on Apple? It's on one of those two.
I honestly don't know. There's so much. I'm so behind.
What I would argue with both of those, I know it's on one of those. It's on Apple, according to JT Street. There are so many free ways to get an Apple TV Plus subscription that, buy a new iPhone, buy a new device. I think Verizon gives a free Apple TV Plus. You probably know someone who could let you watch that. There are some shows, though, where I've thought about, geez, maybe I'm just going to wait until I could buy this, rent it on Amazon, because even though it's technically cheaper to spend the $9.99 a month or $5.99 a month to get it, I'm not going to remember to cancel it. I'm going to end up spending much more money. Heels on Stars is one I'd like to watch that I might wait until either every episode is out and I could just watch it in 10 days and then cancel right away. So I do think there is fatigue here. I think we're going to have models shifting. We're going to see some things like, well, we have a big hit show and we're Apple. Maybe the morning show needs to be on, a network so more people get interested in it. We've seen this with some Canadian shows. Schitt's Creek started this way. That was a Canadian production that eventually was on Pop in the US. Even shows like How I Met Your Mother, which was a mega hit, was not a mega hit until it went into syndication and started getting. So I do think we're going to see, are we going to see Netflix put Stranger Things on, TBS? No, probably not. But we might see some of these well-regarded but low-watch shows. If Ted Lasso aired on NBC, that would probably be really, really smart in terms of getting people interested in a new season. More people are going to watch Titans because of that. With that, Steve, we're going to move on. We're going to switch chairs. I know I talked a little bit more here than I normally do. We kind of did a show a little more geared towards me than towards you. We're going to talk about the new Amazon price hike in a moment. But before we do that, Steve, we are rocketing towards the 1st of October. That is preposterous to me. Right. My anniversary happens late September. My wife's birthday is October 8th. Mine is October 16th. You could send me presents if you want, but please don't. But that being said, it feels to me like it's July, but now it's October. But what happens on October 1st? Because you and I, that's a very big day for the two of us.
Yeah. New recommendations every single month. We release 7 recs, one from each of our lead advisors. We call those our best single stock ideas at that time. Every single month, 1st of the month, they're released. And that's a fun time of the month. So always ends up being pretty busy because we field a lot of questions about those from our members. in the inbox, and we're just excited to release our newest ideas.
If you would like to become a member, it is very simple. All you have to do is drive to Steve's house. You got to bring Bitcoin. No, all you have to do is go to 7investing.com/subscribe for $49 a month or $399 a year, which is roughly 4 months free. You get access to all of those picks. You also get to learn more about us. So you might go, hey, I've seen Dan on the show. I sort of know what he covers. You might be surprised at a couple of my picks that go outside the sort of conservative stocks I talk about all the time. You might be surprised, at Steve's depth of knowledge that, maybe there are companies we don't talk about on 7 Investing now because they were picks or because they're maybe, sort of too small for a public facing show. And of course, if you would like to save $10 off your first month or $10 off an annual subscription, use the code now. We are not going to belabor that. You have been quiet out there, 7 Investing Nation. So feel free to weigh in on the program. We're going to switch gears a little bit here. So here, Steve, here's what's happening. And this may be more relevant to me than you. Do you have a Whole Foods anywhere near you? Is that a thing in Missoula, Montana?
No, we have lots of local organic grocery stores that are very Whole Foods-esque, but no Whole Foods nearby.
So Amazon, as of October 25th, is adding a $10 charge for Whole Foods delivery orders. Previously, if you were a Prime member, you got Whole Foods delivery for free. And Steve, this was something I took advantage of maybe twice a week because Amazon does a really good job in packaging it in these sort of like nice bags that keep the cold in. So if like a show runs long or the order comes early, like my fish or meat or whatever I ordered doesn't go bad.
Yeah.
And you only had to place a $35 order. And when I saw that this was happening, even though it's not happening to the 25th, I needed some stuff for dinner tonight. And I just ordered through Instacart because they're going to be charging $10 per order up from zero. And this is one of those things where we're going to switch seats a little bit. Steve's going to take over as host and ask me some questions because this is a little bit more wheelhouse. And of course, we would love your questions as well.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing that comes to mind is it raises the question, is this good for rivals? That's what I'd really be interested to know.
So I think it's good for Instacart. I think there's a lot of people that have Instacart because it gets you your regular grocery store. Here, it gets me Publix. It gets you CVS if you really want. It gets you Costco. But for me, I use it for the liquor store. It delivers from a couple. It delivers from one that sells the Keurig pods, it's pretty far away. So if I need an order of those, it's worth it. But I know with Instacart that not only have I paid $99 a year, but then I'm paying more per item. That's really obvious when you're buying just like 2 bottles of liquor. It's
right.
Less obvious when you're placing like a $60 grocery order. So I do think it will be good for rivals. I think it will be good for the Grubhubs and the Uber Eats of the worlds that are moving into grocery. But I'm not entirely sure that Amazon is wrong. And I actually think this might open the window for this. Steve, you and I talked a little bit about before the show, but when you go into Grubhub, forgetting all the problems of getting the right order or your food showing up or your order being canceled, or you thought that you were placing it with the restaurant and they're not actually a Grubhub partner and they're basically calling the restaurant, or forgetting all of that, when you see a delivery fee, does that make you less willing to order on Grubhub?
Absolutely. If they tack it onto the items itself, I'm less likely to notice. But yeah, the delivery fee, that line gets people.
I feel the same way. So for me, if it's a $4.99 delivery fee versus a $0 delivery fee, it's going to really depend what I'm ordering. So like, sure, if it's our anniversary and my wife and I are getting like dinner from Morton's and it's already $150, what do I care if it's $4.99? But if we're going to Chili's and Chili's is $4.99 and I don't know, Fridays is free, probably just gonna order from Fridays. Like, it's just not that, or Wacky Wings is free, but Super Wings it's just not that different. But here's the reality. It costs money to deliver. And I actually think this is a case where whether it gets added on sort of clandestinely to the product's cost, or it's just a standard, unless you pay an annual fee, every order is $4.99 and certain premium orders are even more. I actually think this is going to be the new normal for all delivery services, because at some point, and this is going to be true of Uber and Lyft, by the way, as well. At some point, doesn't the cost of delivery of like actually providing the service have to reflect what it costs to do that? It isn't free to deliver me my dinner.
Yeah. So, let's shift a little bit. So, you think it's going to help rivals, but maybe the bigger question is, will it hurt Amazon?
So I do think in the short term, it's going to hurt Whole Food sales because until you start seeing other people do this, now I don't know what the overlap between people who pay for Instacart, so have the impression of free delivery. I don't think the average person sees that little disclaimer that prices might be higher, and they only might be higher. So, grocery stores, you may not notice that. So I do think anyone that has an option, not anyone, but maybe like 60, 70% of people that have the option might go elsewhere. That being said, Whole Foods is a premium product. Now, Steve, if you could see how close I live to Whole Foods, you would find this ridiculous. I can almost see Whole Foods out my door. If I had there wasn't a Target in between us, I'd absolutely be able to see Whole Foods. But we work a long day sometimes. And if I want to cook dinner, I can't, like today, I have food in the slow cooker, but I don't have rolls and I'm going to make sandwiches tonight. So I placed a $35 order through Instacart. I got some iced coffee and some things I don't need that I can always have in the house. So yeah, in the short term, I think this hurts Amazon, but I'm not so sure. And if it matters, if your sales go down, let's say sales go down 5% at Whole Foods, but profitability goes up because they no longer lose money on every order. I also think some of us who are very lazy about this, and I would literally be like, can I add one more iced coffee to get to $35? Some of us might be like, okay, I'm paying $10. Maybe I should order my groceries and just spend $150 and get everything I need. So do I think it will hurt? Yes. Do I think it will hurt long-term? Probably no. Okay. Steve, any thoughts on this? Because can you order from any grocery store? Again, you live in a much more rural area than I do.
I mean, I can get all the way across town in 15 minutes at pretty much any time of the day. So I'm not too concerned about that. I will order from Costco because their parking situation is not always ideal, and it's never fun to go across town to snag there. But, that's, I believe, through Instacart anyway. But there's a great comment from Max Lucas I'd like to highlight. That's a perfect segue. He says, are we finally starting to see an end to the race to the bottom in free delivery, especially with so many supply chain issues? I'm not sure how much supply chain has to do with it, but I've always personally been skeptical of the economics behind food and grocery delivery anyway, especially when they're trying to call it free. So that raises the question, maybe for you, Dan, I'd like to hear, is this the beginning of a sort of cost correction for the delivery business?
Yeah, I think it is. So I think there might be some very smart technology that helps the Ubers and the DoorDashes and the Lyfts of the world, where they get really, really smart with, like, Steve can pay $1 less for his trip from the airport if he's willing to let the driver stop and pick up Joe's dry cleaning. Like, I think there's going to be some of that offsets cost. But the reality is, and I've talked about this a lot when it comes to the driver services. If previously at the airport, I had to wait in a line and spend $18 to get from the airport to my house, which is like 2 miles. If you are Uber or Lyft, you don't have to undercut that by $300. You don't have to go to $6 and no waiting time. Just no waiting time is good. So if you're like $16 versus $18, and I don't have to wait in a big long line, that would have been good enough. But because there's two of them, we've had this sort of race to the bottom where they've made it about pricing. I fully expect that there's going to be some Major League Baseball style collusion in these industries where they basically say, hey, quietly, let's just raise our prices 30% across the board. I think we've seen a lot of that in the pandemic, especially when there aren't enough drivers. That's been a real challenge. Not so much here in West Palm, where a lot of the trips are either really beneficial, like to airports, or just really local and easy, and the costs are relatively high. But in Orlando, it's been a big problem because that's such a big area that if you want to get picked up at your hotel, like where I am in Davenport, driven 20 minutes to Magic Kingdom, if there isn't a fare waiting for you at Magic Kingdom, you could end up like 2 hours from home by the time you're done with your shift. It can get really, really tricky. So yeah, technology will be important here. But I do think we're going to see prices go up. And I hate to say this as a consumer, but I think they should. I don't want to see companies artificially keeping prices low. Now, look, it's one thing if you're in the grocery space, if you're Walmart and you say, you know what, I don't need to make money on grocery because maybe when you're here, you'll buy some whatever. You'll buy some sporting equipment or you'll buy some garden stuff, which is high margin or whatever it might be, or clothes or who knows what. That's one strategy. But if your product is the loss leader and I'm not selling you anything else, that is a really big problem. We're going to move on to the next topic here. This is way too much of me, Steve. I appreciate you you indulging me here on this. It was a tough show to put together today because there was not a ton going on, and we did a lot of sort of like market related shows last week, so I didn't want to do one. If you have a question on anything market related, you want a question about Steve's dog. My wife is fascinated with Steve's dog, which doesn't look real, but I've actually seen it move, so I know it is real. We would love your questions and comments. But Steve, I was fascinated by this today. This actually came from JT Street, our producer here. Treasury yields are up to 1.5%. So nothing, essentially, but 1.5%.
Yeah.
And we've seen the ongoing narrative that pullbacks in growth tech stocks are caused by rising treasury yields. And I've seen this because my biggest holding is Microsoft, and everything else is up in my portfolio today, except a couple of biotechs. And then I looked and I'm down for the day, and it's because Microsoft has taken a big tumble. There is no reason heading into Windows 11 and an Office price increase, unless you really, really hated the new Surface, which is a pretty irrelevant part of their business, that Microsoft should be down. Steve, why on earth would a 1.5% treasury yield be bad for stocks that have historically given pretty healthy returns? And in the case of Microsoft, I don't know what the dividend yield is, but is it more than 1.5% a year? It might be.
Yeah, I think it is. But so the general narrative is that as rates climb and yields increase and fixed income investments become more attractive, then equities or stocks, as we know them, in general become less attractive. So the story goes that money flows out of stocks and into bonds and treasuries. But again, I think we need to keep in mind that this is just one of many variables when it comes to understanding how the stock market works. It's a very narrow view of the markets to say that treasuries treasury yields increase, so that's why stocks are down. Like, you'll see a lot of headlines. I saw one headline this morning blaming the pullback in mega cap stocks on rising treasury yields. But part of that pullback can be owed to the huge run up in those mega cap stocks relative to pretty much every other segment of the market so far in 2021. Value stocks, mid and small cap growth stocks have all kind of underperformed relative to those mega caps. And you might argue that they were due for a correction anyway, that we have a little bit of a reversion to the mean, right? And allowing other asset categories, at least in the stock market, to catch up. So those as those others, those small cap growth, mid cap growth, even value stocks have been sort of largely ignored. There's a lot more to it than just treasury rates, but that's something we really need to keep in mind. One variable in a very complicated market.
So, Steve, you and I are not income investors, but let me ask the question. If we're talking 1.5, even if we're talking 3%,
right,
aren't you better off buying Microsoft and Costco and other just very steady companies that have real value that are, look, Microsoft's not going anywhere. Costco's not going anywhere. Like, I'm not even saying like AT&T, a traditional, high paying dividend, because there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of things that could go wrong there, but there are 10 companies I could think of off the top of my head that pay a dividend that are very, very steady. And if you don't particularly care about where the value of the stock sits because you're not going to sell it at any point, isn't that a better bet than buying a fixed interest treasury bond? Or I don't even know what that would look like, because that hasn't been a thing in my life.
I know. And part of it is that treasury yields are so low. It's all relative, right? When we look back to like last summer, for example, I think the 10-year treasury note, if you look up a chart of the 10-year treasury rate, like historical rates. And I think this time last year it was like 0.7%. So going from 0.7 to 1.5, it's like, oh my God, rates have, the yields have increased, they've doubled or whatever. But, going into, they were closer to 3% about 3 years ago, and go back to 2000, they were close to 5%. Back in the 80s, they were like 15%. So to say, a 1.5% treasury yield, it's all relative, and they were a lot lower once, kind of at the height of when the pandemic really first started to unfold last year. But I've never been a big
I'll put
treasury
this in
guy.
terms that Max Chatsko will appreciate. Max probably not watching today. He's doing a bit of a staycation this week. But that being said, let's say the Pittsburgh Pirates double their win total from 20 to 40. Well, that's good technically, but in a 162 game baseball, I think they're only playing 150 something this year, but on a traditional 162 game baseball season, that's not that important. So I'll give another sports example. Zach Wilson cut his interceptions in half this week. He only threw 2 instead of 4. Still bad. He just threw another one, even though the game is over. That I love needling Jets fans here. So I do think I get that there's a certain amount of people. My grandfather was big into bonds and the safety and I actually think there's a lot of safety in the equities markets, depending what you're buying. That, again, should you be buying shares of like the hot new tech stock, even if it's a fairly stable one, like say Zoom, which obviously has price volatility, but you don't think the company's going anywhere. Well, that's way more risky. But if you're buying, again, I'll keep bringing up Microsoft because as I've said is my biggest holding. Microsoft might have a down year. It might go down 10%. It might, it's points it's fallen by 30 or 40% during the Windows 8 debacle. But your principle is largely going to be intact. So I don't know. We've talked about this a lot. This was the entire theme of last week, is that headlines don't matter. Yeah. And a lot of times just we're looking for a reason to do what we were going to do anyway. So I think we saw this last week. A lot of people kind of wanted to sell. They were a little nervous in certain stocks, so they were waiting for a reason. And then when those people sold and there was a downturn, there was a lot of money out there that went, downturn, I got to buy. And for all we talked last week with crazy volatility, Steve, what did the market do for the week? Do you know?
I think it actually ended up. It had like 2 or 3 straight days of green.
The market ended up. So basically Monday, Tuesday, we were basically all building like fallout shelters and like hoarding, kind bars and bottles of water. And then by Friday, it was like happy days are here again. Tune it all out. We're going to pivot a little bit. Yeah. You have all been quiet out there. So you got another minute or two if you want to ask us something or say hello or whatever that might be. We see you watching and we appreciate that. But that being said, Steve, JT, why don't we hit our finisher? What's the biggest threat to Tesla's continued success? I think it's worth pointing out that a lot of people online were offended at the notion that there was any possibility that there would be a threat to Tesla's continued success. 28.4% of you said China. 16% of you said Elon Musk's Twitter. 36.5% said legacy car makers. 19.1% said a new player. And a meaningful amount of you in the comments talked about things like battery shortages. And the reality is battery shortages would, I think, impact everyone. And Tesla would be probably the best at engineering their way out of it. So I don't want to dismiss your concerns, but I don't think that's a concern. But Steve, let's get your thoughts on this one.
Oh, man. I'm tempted to vote sarcastically Elon Musk's Twitter, but if I'm voting realistically, I'd maybe say China, which could be part of the reason he's been so complimentary of China of late in the last couple of months, talking about, they are crucial to Tesla's longer term plans, and they plan to invest a fair bit of money there. So I would say there. I'm not so convinced that legacy car makers are a big threat to its success because, it's not just a car maker. When we look at its renewable energy plans and battery storage and stuff, but I'd say China.
I'm trying to think of a way to say this without being political, but it is enjoyable to watch Elon Musk praise the Chinese government. Well, I don't care where you fall politically in the U.S. Certainly, we're not China, no matter what you think of the government. But I get what you have to do to do operations there. We've seen it with Starbucks. We've seen it with other companies. You sort of do have to kiss the ring a little bit. But Steve, I'm actually going to argue that it's legacy car makers because everyone talks about all this optionality and all these other things. Like, sure, but they don't make any money selling solar or batteries and I get it. They have a big advantage, but their pricing is very expensive. If Toyota, let's just pick one. Let's say Toyota does team up with Apple, which was rumored. We did a show on it a few months back. And they come out with, let's call it the iCar. They won't call it that, but let's pretend we do. What if it's 18 grand and it's got the same mileage as a Model 3, and it's kind of cool looking. Like, doesn't that seem to you like it could disrupt them? Like what am I missing on this? Like, Tesla to me is priced so far beyond what I'd ever spend on a car that I can't see that I'd buy it.
Yeah, I do though. I think it comes down to kind of brand fanatics and loyalty and people kind of admiring the engineering and the vision and love him or hate him, Elon Musk. It's kind of interesting to see, the South African lead of this car maker thinking globally, and I think people will still buy Teslas, and I think it also helps that they're growing from such a small base, right? They don't have the issues of trying to retire, an existing line of vehicles and basically cannibalizing their existing sales as they transition over to electric. And I'm not too concerned about disruption from vehicles like that, because I do think Tesla will respond. They're very, very dynamic, and they're very, very innovative, and they work pretty quickly. I think they'll be just fine regardless of who pops up.
I'm not sure how big that potential base is, and we've talked a lot about this with Peloton as well. And I've been looking at various expensive exercise equipment, and there's so much out there that it's almost like paralysis by analysis, because I'm leaning towards one, but it's the most expensive thing out there, and that seems crazy to me. Yeah. But I do wonder if at some point they've just hit their market. We will take the last comment that came in if you want to pull that up. And if you want to read that, Steve, you can probably see it better than I can.
Yeah, Roman, 1980-2011 says, I bought a Model 3 in June, and in many ways, it's the best car I've ever owned. Don't see myself ever going back to an ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine vehicle. You hear that a lot. And, even from people who try out other electric vehicles, they buy Teslas, and they're so blown away by the experience that they don't see themselves ever going back.
It does seem like a lovely vehicle. And Steve, I don't know what you drive. We've talked about that. I drive a Prius, which is a lovely experience compared to driving my previous fully electric car, though my previous car was small, so it got very good mileage, but I don't need gas very often. It's silent when I'm going slowly. It has solar air conditioning. It has a lot of neat things. And I'm not sure there's any way I can justify the cost difference. We've talked about this so many times, but I don't want to spend more than 15 grand for a car. There is no used Tesla out there that costs less than 30 grand. So aren't they just pricing out? Do they need their version of Mini? Mini is BMW under sort of a different brand as a way to expand the base. Isn't most of the car market $15,000 to $20,000 or maybe even $10,000 to $20,000?
Yeah, I think they only continue to scale down, and that's kind of what we've seen them do. From their earliest versions of the Roadster to the Model S, and on down to the Model 3 currently, and more recently, earlier this month, we've seen kind of reiterations of their plans to release a $25,000 electric vehicle in 2023. A lot of people are calling that the Model 2, tentatively. So we'll see what happens, I guess. But I think they just continue to lower the price. And when you get a $25,000 brand new vehicle coming out, presumably in 2023 is the goal. That should be really, really interesting, because the Model 3 has already become, I believe, the best-selling electric vehicle in history. So
let's also take that with a grain of salt, though. And again, I'm not negative Tesla. If I had the money, it's not that I don't have the money. It's just that I could use the money better in other places. I would drive a Tesla. It looks really cool. My uncle has one. Anirban has one. I could see a lot of positives now that I live someplace where I could put in a charger where I get a Tesla. But for me, when they said 35,000 on the Model 3, I didn't know that actually meant 45,000. There are no $35,000 Model 3s. So if you truly hit 25 and there's a $5,000 tax incentive or whatever it might be, depending where you live and where they are with the credit, there's all sorts of complicated measurements for that. Yep. I would definitely think they're a player, but but I feel like Toyota or Volkswagen is going to get there with just like a $16,000 one or an 18,000 or whatever. Again, I've never bought a new car. We've never bought a car that wasn't, at least a year old. Max Lucas, you've basically been a co-host. We'll perhaps have you on. We're going to have more of our network on in the coming weeks as we all get very busy with trade shows and travel and other things as that happen. But why don't we let Max's comment close out the day? He says, I think the biggest threat to Tesla, the stock, is that it gets revalued as a car company, not as an everything to everyone company. I'll argue that it's valued as a fantasy at the moment. It's valued based on Elon Musk is famous and people think he's especially brilliant. And a lot of people also said in the comments, like, the biggest risk is like Elon dying. I actually feel like if Elon stepped aside and they moved into their Steve Cook phase, that actually might be a good thing for Tesla for the next like 5 or 6 years, to just really focus on operations. And like you said, 2023, and in my head, I just went 2026. Like, I don't trust anything that they say they're going to do. And again, don't send me hate mail. I like the company. I am probably will become a shareholder at some point. I'm not, but I have a fractional account through Stockpile now, so perhaps I will buy some shares. So I don't want to come off as negative. But Steve, your thoughts here?
Yeah, I would disagree that they're valued as a quote unquote fantasy, right? And this is coming from, I'm a Tesla shareholder for the past 2.5 years. I think I first bought my shares in June 2019. It was like a split adjusted $40 a share. And I'm hanging on. I think they're arguably undervalued at this point, and there could be a potential threat that they're revalued as a car company, but I think they're largely viewed as a tech innovator and for their battery technologies. And we've done Tesla bull and bear case podcasts here at Seven Investing before. Go look up our Tesla bull and bear case podcast, and you can have an idea of kind of both sides of the coin there. But yeah, I respectfully disagree. I think they're appropriately valued here.
So we do a lot of deep dives for our members. Every stock we pick each month, we do essentially a deep dive, which is a PowerPoint presentation followed by Q&A. But we've done a number of public-facing deep dives. We did one on Netflix. We did one on Tesla. So if you're not a member and you're curious as to sort of how Seven Investing works, go to seveninvesting.com and JT Street, maybe if you want to tweet some of those out from the master account today, you get an idea of how our thought process works. The one that Anirban and I did on Netflix with, of course, the whole team along, but we were the ones who prepped it, really shows you how we approach our stock picks and what we're doing and just sort of what you get as a member. With that, Steve, this went about 10 minutes longer than I expected. We appreciate so many of you watching. We appreciate all of you who will be watching this or listening to it later. I will be back on Wednesday with Anirban. I think I'm also going to have our friends from Chit Chat Money. I recorded a really cool piece where they try to convince me that I'm wrong about Spotify. We didn't frame it exactly that way, but I think we're going to air that on Wednesday's show. And then I will be back Friday, I believe, with Simon Erickson doing part 2 of the show on international investing. Part 1 out on last Friday. Please go watch that if you haven't. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we are info@seveninvesting.com. That is an email address. That goes to Steve. That is questions about your membership, questions about joining the site, if you're not a member, what it would look like, maybe questions about our student membership. I didn't even talk about that, but if you're an active student, it is $84 a year to join. That is only an annual option. But any questions about our service, maybe you can't find something on the site, or you don't know how something works, or you want to subscribe to this show or our podcast and you're not sure how to do that, those are the types of questions you could send there. If you want to interact with us, if you have questions about stocks, now we're not going to research the $20 million micro cap you just created yesterday. But if it's a stock that's in our wheelhouse, we are usually happy to talk on social media. That is at Seven Investing. So until Wednesday, I am Dan Klein for JT Street, for Steve Symington. We'll see you later.